host, Tot. Right, welcome back to Talks with Tot. You made it to episode 3. Congratulations. I'm Tot. I'm your host, and today we're going to be talking about law enforcement. So, hence the reason I got my thin blue line flag up, and I've also got my hat on. So, why are we going to be talking about law enforcement? I thought the last episode was about construction and how I'm a construction superintendent. Well, a lot of you know, and some of you don't, surprise, I am a reserve deputy sheriff. And what does that mean? What is a reserve? Well, it means kind of, a lot of people get really confused on what a reserve is, even full-timers do. Basically, depending upon, it's a little complicated, so depending upon which level you're at, there's 3 levels for LA County. You start with a level 3, you go to a level 2, and then you go to a level 1. You can be a level 1 designate, which means you've done your patrol training, and you are operating as a full-blown peace officer, just like the guys that are every day do their jobs. What's the difference between a reserve and a full-timer? So a reserve gets paid $1 a year. 94 cents every January gets deposited into my account. And that's basically just in case I get into an on-duty shooting or something, basically makes me an employee, and they can help cover any medical that, knock on wood, anything ever happens. Other than that, we go through an academy that is what they call modular. So while we're doing our full-time job, you go all day Sunday, Monday nights, Wednesday nights, you go to the range, sometimes Saturdays, sometimes Tuesdays, it all depends. But it's roughly I went to 2 different academies, one for a level 3-2 and one for a level 1. And it's all together almost, a year and a half of these modular academies. And when you do a 3-2, as you get out as a level 2, which I was for quite some time until they opened up a level 1 academy, you're a permanent bookman, and you wear the uniform. They issue you the duty belt, the gun, you have handcuffs, you have all the same provisions as a regular full-time deputy, and you go out on patrol. Now, you don't have to go out on patrol. You can do other duties. You can help out at parades, work around the station. You can do search and rescue. There's a lot of different, for LA County, you can do mounted posse, which is the horses. They have a bunch of different ways that you can assist. You know, I like to call it volunteering, even though I'm a sworn deputy. But you kind of do it part-time. And you do it when you're available. I've been doing it the last 5 years, and I'm a patrol deputy. So as a level 1, what does that mean? I'm on training. There's 6 phases. Normally a full-timer will go through the equivalent of 6 months of field training, where you work with a field training officer. Mine have been really good. My current one is super fantastic. And you go out and you go to calls. And being in law enforcement, it's really fun because you get in the car and it's kind of like roulette. You kind of have an idea, like, where do I want to go for lunch today or dinner, depending upon your shift. And then you just drive around what's called an RD, your area that the county that you're working in is kind of mapped in. And you get calls slung at you. So you have a computer inside the car and you log in, and all of a sudden, ding, you get a call, right? And depending upon the nature of the call, you may have to turn on the red lights and siren and get to it quick, that's called a priority. Or you can do stops, like a traffic stop right there and then. You see something and you're like, well, I gotta pull this person over. Let's go have a conversation. And I really enjoy it. I'll go more into detail. I'll tell you guys a couple of stories here. I don't want to bore you, but I do want to give you a little bit of the background, because you're going to go, how did you get into law enforcement? Tatiana, I mean, you've been 25 years. If you've been doing law enforcement for 5 years, that means that 20 years in construction. Why would you want to put yourself through all that? And the answer is kind of simple. My dad was a full-time deputy sheriff, and he retired out probably the better of almost 30 years ago now. And growing up, I had always thought, that's something that guys do. I didn't think it was something that girls could do. And in my travels, I used to race Ironman triathlon, and I had a retired police chief who was my coach. And one of the ladies on my team, Kim, love you, Kim, she says, I'm a reserve. And I was like, what is this reserve thing? It wasn't really out there, and it still isn't out there. I mean, most of you have probably not heard about it until you met me. And so, I kind of went, that's interesting, And I don't want it to be like, well, if she can do it, I can do it, right? But it definitely starts you thinking, where you're like, wow, I thought it would be scary. And one of my biggest fears was always getting shot. Why I had that fear, I don't know. You live in LA. Not that LA is people running around with guns pointing them at you. I've never had a gun besides being on patrol. Have someone have a gun and point it at you. I grew up very safe. I went to private high school. Why would you want to get into law enforcement? And it was fun. It wasn't until I had bought a house and I had moved, and there was these fires that took place, and I was evacuated for the first time in my life. And it was startling because it happened at like 3 o'clock in the morning, and you're half asleep and you're running around grabbing stuff. And I grabbed a bunch of things that wouldn't help me for the next week that I was displaced from my home, and I needed to go home and get some things. And everything was locked down. But my dad, who was a retired deputy sheriff, he was able to, just flash his badge and say, hey, I'm a cop. And the other cop let him in. And we were able to drive right up to my house and get what I needed and come back. And there was a lady there who was like, I left my dog. And I was like, how did you leave your dog? Why would you do that? And she says, they won't let me in. Can you help me? And my dad and I are both animal lovers. And I looked at my dad and I was like, Dad, you have the truck. You have to go help her. So my dad and his buddy, who we had gone to lunch with, who's also a reserve, he's been a reserve for over 50 years. And my dad had always tried to, hey, it'd be great if you could meet, my buddy Gary. He's been a reserve forever, and I'm always working, right? And they go to lunch because they're retired. And so this one time, my dad said, hey, you're, crashing at my house, and I'm going to go to lunch with Gary and Kenny. I'd love it if you would come. And I was like, sure, I got nothing else to do. I can't go to work. I don't have any clothes. And so I went to lunch and I met Gary and Kenny, and Gary was like, are you military? No. But apparently, I guess just the way I carry myself and the way that I interacted, he was like, you should be a reserve. And I was like, what's a reserve? What is this? And after the interaction of being able to help that woman go get her dog, right? I mean, I still can't fathom leaving, if there was a fire, if I had to grab my cat, he would be the first thing I'd grab. So anyways, I went home after that interaction and I looked on the website. I had to look really hard because, like I said, reserves it's not the most flashy thing and not everybody wants to do it. $1 a year, you're going to go put yourself out in there for someone to shoot at you or attack you or have to get into a fight, heaven forbid. And I signed up and I didn't tell my dad. And it wasn't until later on that I said, I actually applied to be a reserve deputy sheriff. And my dad was like, what are you thinking? And I said, I don't know. I just, I think it'd be fun and I want to help. And so it took me about a year of background checks and physicals and all different kinds of interviews and go here and do this and take a test and, so on and so forth of waiting and, just a lot of process, they finally opened up an academy and I was selected. And I was so excited. The friends that you make, the people that you interact with, it's just you carry them with you for the next, rest of your life. So to all of you that are watching that were in my academy, you guys are like family, that. So that's kind of the story of why and how, and what a reserve is. So let's talk a little bit more about patrol. I know you guys, some of you are married to, deputies or, in police, they call them officers. Sheriff's Department basically runs the county and they do the prisons and jails. So if you're an unincorporated city, like back home, I work in Santa Clarita. It's an unincorporated city. They don't have their own police department. I work there and I go out on patrol. And one of the things I really wanted to highlight for you guys is when you put all that gear on, and I say all that gear, right? You've got your bulletproof vest on, you've got your duty belt, you've got your baton, you've got OC spray, you've got a taser, you've got your backup magazines, you've got your duty weapon, your radio, handcuffs, you name it. Those are your tools, right? If you're a carpenter, that would be like your hammer, and you carry that around for the whole entire day. And you get in the car. I'll never forget the first day I get in the car, I had my vest on, and in the academy, you don't wear your vest when you're sitting in class. You just wear what we have. Class A uniforms and Class B uniforms, and we're in Class B uniforms. And they're kind of like, I equate them to being kind of like jammies. They're cotton. Your Class A is wool and much more stiff, not as free to move about. Anyways, my first day I'm in the car and I've got my vest on and I can barely look down and see all the tools on my tool belt. And I just thought, I feel like the Marshmallow Man. How am I going to get into a fight with someone and move around and I can't even find anything? Well, after driving around in a car, getting in, getting out, and your first day, you still go to calls, but it's definitely with your training officer kind of programmed, right? Like you drive around the city, you get familiar with being in a radio car. But back to talking about the gear, right? When you put all that gear on, and it's hot or it's cold, that gear weighs about 25, 30 pounds. So, some of you go and exercise and you put on extra weight vests. That's a lot of weight and it's around your waist and you got to run and jump and move and, sit in the car, get in, get out. So for those of you that are not aware, it's a very heavy uniform that you wear. So some of you are probably asking, I always get asked, why don't you go full time? Why would you be a reserve? And the reason for that is because I've got the 25 years in construction. I know the ins and the outs, and that's where I make my money, right? I make a pretty decent salary doing construction as a senior superintendent. That was episode 2. If you're new here, welcome. And so I love to give back. I love to be able to see people's homes. I love to, talk to people. And one of the fun things about being a reserve is when you have the full-timers, just like with anything, right? You get very accustomed to your day in, day out, and you start to get a little jaded, right? You learn things about people. You're interacting with someone on patrol, and it may be the worst day of their life. Right? They could have been stabbed, they could have been shot, they could have been robbed, their baby could have drowned in the swimming pool, right? There's so many different things, and when you're interacting with people, you get to see that there are bad people out there, and not everybody's bad, right? In my academy, I remember my drill sergeant was telling us, of 100% of the people, right? Let's just say that 30% of them are bad, right? Maybe they steal something, petty theft, or, they damage things, or I don't know. of that 30%, right, like 2% are really bad. Really bad. I mean, we're talking about the murderers and, baby killers, animal killers, things like that. So when you look at the population, yeah, I mean, today, right, it's 2025. People are starting to kind of lose their minds a little bit. We've had a lot of just within politics and whatnot, some of the judges have been kind of very lenient, and there hasn't been a lot of people who get arrested and they stay in jail. They get cited back out and are expected to go and sit in front of a judge and get sentenced. And a lot of the system, if you haven't been to court, it's interesting. To be honest with you, I don't know if I don't think you can just go sit and listen, but I have, and it's very interesting. People talk about it being broken, and it's broken. It's broken in the sense where, someone goes in for kind of a hearing and it says, hey, let's kick the can down the road another couple of days because the public defender has too many dockets and they're not ready, or something to that effect, right? And as the regular everyday person, you don't think about going to court. You don't think about being handcuffed and having your Fourth Amendment rights of freedom taken away, right? So it definitely shows you a different side of the world that not everyday people get to see. And with that, one of the stories, because I love stories, one of the stories that I want to tell you guys about is this one time we were on patrol. It was evening time. We got a call, and it was a kind of a domestic disturbance. There was a roommate and the landlord, and we get there. The landlord was an older gentleman who, the story that the roommate, the tenant, this woman, she's telling us that, he would come. There was 2 women that were living there, and he would come and he told them, hey, as the landlord, I reserve the right if I ever need to crash here on the couch that I can. And, of course you're hearing this and you're like, well, that's not right. That's weird. So what had happened was one of the women had accused the man of kind of trying to come into her room, and she felt threatened by that, and she hit him in the head with a alarm clock. And so the guy was trying to get in his car and drive away, and he ran into a bush, and the neighbors got involved. And when you go to a scene like this, first you have to control the scene, right? And you have to figure out what's going on. Who really is, kind of the aggressor, if there is one, or who's causing this, to have an issue. And so you got to separate the parties, and you have to talk to people. And so we go into the apartment building, or it was a townhouse. We go into the townhouse, and they smoke inside, and there's, belongings everywhere. And you go into this woman's room, and she's sleeping on a mattress on the floor, and she had a cat. And in the scuffle, they had knocked over the cat litter box, and this was part of the story. And there's, cat litter in the carpet. And so you go back outside and you're talking to the guy, and he says, yeah, she hit me in the head with the alarm clock, and I think I have a bump. And so you say, okay, yeah, I'm going to touch your head, and you're touching the head, and he's got cat litter in his hair. And I'm thinking to myself, who does this? And not judging, right? It's just different than how I live, but some of that is fascinating, right? And in your conversations, it's like, how do you end up living here? What's going on? How do you guys allow this guy to come back? So on and so forth. But that's one of the ones where, you never forget the cat litter in the hair, right? Another story, a fun one, during COVID, I had a partner. I wasn't on training. I just had a partner for a while, and we get a call, and it was me and, we call him Action Jackson. Jackson retired. And Action Jackson gets the call, and they said, hey, there's somebody trespassing in this cabin up Sierra Highway. So we, Jackson's like, 6, 6, and 6. And the desk is like, Jackson, are you sure you can get there in 6 minutes? And Jackson's like, yes, ma'am. And it was, it wasn't up Sierra Highway. It was up Bouquet Canyon. And Bouquet Canyon, if you know that road goes all the way up and over the mountain, and it's windy. And one of the things that we have to worry about when we're out on patrol is reception. So we have a car radio, and then we have our radios that's on our duty belt. And we basically operate off of 2 channels. We have dispatch, which talks to kind of the people down at the radio control tower downtown. And then there's also LTAC, and LTAC is more for conversations with our partners or with the station. And when you go into an area that doesn't have reception, your radio stops working. And then you have your computer in the car, and that's called your MDC. The MDC will go out of range. And so when you go up Bouquet Canyon, your radio stops working, your MDC stops working. And so you got to formulate a plan. Jackson's like, hey, navigate me to this location. And I think we had 3 other cars that went with us and a sergeant. And we're, speeding up this windy road. And we get to the location. It was a highway patrol. And we meet with the highway patrol, and he takes us up to the location, which is this house across this creek. And the homeowner had called and said, hey, there's someone in the cabin. Okay. So we get together, and everybody has to decide who's going to be, in charge of the radio, who's going to be part of the approach team, who's going to stand back. And when we got there, I grabbed the shotgun out of the car, and, I'm looking up at this cabin up on the hill, and I'm thinking, I don't like this at all. This looks like an ambush. We are at the low ground, and I'm not a great deputy, but I'm thinking, just as a human being, this just feels weird. So anyways, they call it like when the little hairs on the back of your neck stand up. So I grabbed the shotgun, and they had an approach team, and they walk up across the creek, and they walk up, and the guy says, hey, Samuel, stand here behind this tree and point that shotgun on that back door. And if anybody comes out that back door, you shoot them. Okay. Yes, sir. So I'm standing there, and I watch the approach team go up, and I got the shotgun, and I'm standing there, and I'm behind the tree, and I got a partner with me. And, you're watching, and you're looking, and you're trying to do that identification thing. Is anybody coming out the door? Okay, is anyone coming out the door now? Right? And so as I'm watching, someone starts to come out the door, and it's a dog, right? And I'm like, okay, don't shoot the dog, right? And then the next person that comes out is one of my partners. Okay, I see him, I see the uniform, don't shoot your partner either. So he gives us over the radio, hey, it's all clear, right? There's 2 people in the house, they're detaining them, yada, 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 so on and so forth. Every single time I drive up Bouquet Canyon, I always talk about that trespassing call. I will always talk about that time that I had the shotgun, and it felt like I was standing out there for an hour holding the shotgun up. And it's complicated, right? I mean, you have to make your own conscious decision to shoot someone if you see someone, right? And it's like, why am I shooting them? Just because they're trespassing? Do they have a weapon? Is it my partner, right? So there's a lot that goes into it. But I'll tell you, those high adrenaline moments, they're so much fun. I mean, you get a call at a hair salon, and it's closed, and the alarm's going off, and you're walking through trying to clear it. And maybe I think the alarm was off by the time we were in there, and somehow we crossed a line that sent the alarm off again. And, as you're walking through there, you jump because you're, startled, you're in hyper focus mode. At those times, that's when people sometimes will, oops, squeeze the trigger. And luckily we were all professionals and didn't do that. But, it's been an interesting run. It's been a lot of fun, and I really enjoy it. So I'm going to keep doing it as long as I can, as long as I want to. So those are some fun stories. Some of the things that I want you guys to do as a takeaway, right, is some questions that I get. I remember growing up with my brother, and when we turned 16, right, it was, hey, did you know that you can't change lanes in an intersection when you're driving? And I remember I was talking to some ladies at work, Mary and Angela, and they're just a couple years older than me. And it was like, remember those, rumors? And they're like, yeah, we always thought you couldn't change lanes in an intersection. Guess what? Rumor. If you can do it safely, you can change lanes in an intersection. How about Tatiana? Can you drive in flip-flops? You sure can. There's no law that tells you what footwear you can wear on your feet, just as long as it's safe, right? You don't want to have something like, probably don't want to drive in swim fins. That would be a little awkward and difficult. That might stop you from using the either gas pedal or brake pedal. The other thing that I wanted to go over, so changing lanes in an intersection is good. Driving in flip-flops is fine. Question for you guys. If, let's say that you're driving and for some reason you get pulled over, right? And you pull over to the right-hand side of the road, right? We never pull over to the left. Pull over to the right-hand side, and let's say that the cop goes over the loudspeaker and says, driver, please exit the vehicle, right? And you're sitting there going, can they do that? Well, I'm here to tell you, yes, they can. The reason that they're doing it, it's for safety, right? Maybe it's a busy street. Maybe there's something where they don't feel safe approaching the vehicle there and they want the driver to get out. So if for some reason you get pulled over, maybe you look like someone that they're looking for, that happens, and you're the wrong person, but they still need to speak to you, right? If they ask you to get out of the car, just get out of the car, right? How about passengers? Can we order the passengers out of the vehicle? Yes, we can. So that's also a safety factor. So if you've got anybody else in the vehicle, just tell them, hey, you got to get out, right? The other thing I wanted to share was the easiest way for me to get into your vehicle and look around is, and for the traffic stop really, is if you don't have current registration. So I know that it's expensive and I know that it's difficult to, keep up with, which it's really not, but there's a lot of excuses of I was busy or something. And you don't, you have a time period of when you go over that, then we can tow your car. But if you don't have current registration, I can pull you over for that and we can have a conversation, figure out why not, right? Once I do that and I get up to the car window, if you have things in the car that I can see with my eyeballs, let's say you have a meth pipe or you've got some drug paraphernalia, then we have a problem, right? Not saying that the company I keep, hopefully that's watching this, are going to be in that situation. But the moral of the story is, and it's fun if you ask the people I work with, they will tell you that I'm constantly looking at registration stickers. It's just one of those things when you start doing patrol, it's the easiest thing, right? Right now, the color, if it's April, the tag should be red. If you're, in the future a little bit, you're probably still in the yellow tag. But if you've got a blue tag, we have a problem, right? Let's get that corrected. So I had my project manager that I work with. He funny story actually. He would come to work and he would park right next to the trailer. And I said, hey, dude, your registration's expired. And he's like, no, I paid it. And I said, well, where's the sticker? And he's like, I don't know. And I said, well, did you move? And he was like, well, yeah. And I said, did you update your address? And he was like, no, I just figured they knew where to send it. So we had a good chuckle, and that he finally realized why it wasn't being sent to him in the mail. It was being sent to his last address. So he went down to the DMV, and he's not from here. He was born in another country. And so he took his wife and he got a kick out of spending time being in line at the DMV to go speak to the person about getting his current registration sticker, telling him, hey, I paid, but I need to update my address. So make sure you guys look right? Look at your vehicle. You should be doing vehicle inspections, making sure your taillights are working, your headlights are working. And that, if we're speaking freely here, which I always like to do, a lot of these cars nowadays have automatic headlights. There's daytime running lamps, which are different than the automatic headlights. And for some reason, it appears there's a lot of people out there who don't know how to use the equipment on their vehicle. And as I'm driving to my construction job in the morning before the sun has come up, and there are people driving around with no lights on. And that's not safe, right? It's a pet peeve for me, but it's also just not safe. So if you are one of those people who is driving around in your vehicle with no lights on, and you get, flashed. People usually will do that with their bright lights, flash, hey, something's wrong with your vehicle. Either they want you to change lanes because you're driving too slow, or maybe there's, something wrong, like your headlights are not on. So take a look at that, and just make sure that your stuff is up to snuff, right? But this podcast here, it's not to talk down to you or any of that. You guys are all adults. And it's just more to spread awareness, because there's a lot of things that I see that, people are not aware of. So if you have any questions, right, where you're like, hey, usually when I will explain to people what I do in my free time, they will tell me, hey, by the way, this one time when I got a ticket for something, or hey, you don't have to tell me that. You can if you want to, or you need some advice. I don't know everything, but I'm more than happy to listen and look it up. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and put them in the comments below, and I can address them. I can either answer your question right there on the YouTube, or we can bring it up as a topic for discussion in one of the later podcasts on law enforcement. So I appreciate you guys listening. And if you're watching this on either Sunday, when this is hopefully going to get published, which would be April the 6th, or Monday, April 7th, part of the astrology is Mercury has been in retrograde, and Mercury is going to be leaving retrograde and going back, we call it direct. And so any kind of communication errors that you've had, where maybe your cell phone wasn't working, mine, I have difficulty with, connecting it to my vehicle, or when you ask it to take you to Trader Joe's and it's like, I don't understand the command, right? All those little frustrations, maybe your computer at work or your computer at home was causing you some glitches where the program would stall or something. I blame that on Mercury retrograde, and that should be over. And so if you have any major contracts to sign, go ahead, sign those. Typically, a lot of people will say don't sign them during Mercury retrograde, just because of the communication glitches that are, taking place. The other thing that is interesting about Mercury retrograde is usually beforehand and afterwards they have what's called Mercury shadow. And so it may be done, but it's not like, hey, at noon, high noon, right? Mercury's direct and everything's like, whoo, I feel so much better. No, sometimes it'll linger for up to 5 days. So up until the 12th of April, there may still be some snafus. But otherwise, we should be back. Everyone should be feeling pretty good. So wanted to share that and talk about episode 4, which is going to be coming up in a week, and that we're going to talk about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is kind of, how I got into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was from law enforcement, right? It's a grappling art that we'll go into, and we can talk about some of the fun parts of that. So if you have any questions about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, feel free to ask those, and I'll try and answer them in the next podcast. So I hope that you guys are enjoying. I'm seeing a lot of people watching the episodes. I appreciate you. Thank you for your time. And I think this has been great. It's a lot of fun for me. And I hope you guys learned something today in our episode on law enforcement. So the next one's going to be on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And we'll still try and weave in a little bit of astrology here and there as it pertains. And then episode 5 will be on astrology. So feel free to check in then. Take care, you guys. Good to see you. Talks with Todd.